Today, we are diving into a book that was written over 60 years ago, but feels like it could have been written yesterday. It's David Ogilvy's Confessions of an Advertising Man. Now, you've probably heard him called the father of advertising, but as we're about to see, his rules for success, well, they weren't forged in some polished Madison Avenue office. Not even close. Let's just start with this quote, because it really is the key to understanding the whole man. He wasn't looking for those cookie-cutter, suit-and-tie executives. No, he was hunting for rebels, for dissenters, for nonconformists. And, well, it turns out, he was the biggest rebel of them all.
So, how does someone become the undisputed king of Madison Avenue? You'd think it would start with a fancy business degree, right? A clear-cut career path, step by step. But Ogilvy's story, which we're calling the unlikely ad man, proves that the road to mastery is often anything but straight.
Okay, just take a look at this resume. I mean, after getting kicked out of Oxford, Ogilvy didn't climb some corporate ladder. He went on an adventure. He was a chef in a brutally hot Paris kitchen, a door-to-door salesman, a social worker in the slums, a researcher for the legendary Dr. Gallup, and he even became an Amish farmer in Pennsylvania. Think about it. Each one of these jobs gave him this raw, real understanding of people, something no textbook could ever teach.
But out of all those wild experiences, there's one that really stands out. It wasn't in a boardroom, it wasn't in a classroom, it was in the crazy, high-pressure kitchen of the Hotel Majestic in Paris. He said this is where he learned everything, and I mean everything, he needed to know about running a creative team.
So this kitchen was ruled by a guy named Monsieur Petard. Ogilvy described him as a tyrant, the absolute symbol of authority. He was completely terrified of him. But here's the thing. At the same time, he was deeply inspired by him, and he would literally build his entire advertising empire on the principles he learned just from watching this master chef at work.
So what were these game-changing principles? Well, there were three. First, M. Petard was the absolute master of his craft. Once a week, he'd come out of his office and cook a dish, and the entire staff would just stop and watch, totally mesmerized. It showed them what real excellence looked like. Second, he made praise powerful because it was so incredibly rare. Ogilvy remembers decorating frogs' legs one day when Petard stopped everything, gathered the whole kitchen, and said, "That's how to do it." Ogilvy said, "I was his slave for life." And third, he demanded insane standards. He fired 3 pastry chefs in 1 month because the little caps on their brioche were uneven. For him, mediocrity just wasn't an option.
And that is the genius of it, right there. He took these brutal, effective lessons, total mastery, the power of rare praise, and absolutely ruthless standards, and he applied them directly to managing all the creative rebels and dissenters at his own agency.
So he's got his principles down pat, but he's got no reputation and very little money. How in the world does he win clients? Well, his methods were, let's just say, audacious. He didn't just sell his services, he sold a story. A narrative that was almost impossible to ignore.
This right here was his secret weapon. He'd walk into a meeting and he'd paint this picture of the agency life cycle. He'd describe his own little agency as being full of ambitious people, full of dynamite. Then he'd lean in and describe their current agency, where the founders are now rich and tired, the creative fire is gone, and dry rot has set in. He said he could always see the client trying to hide the fact that he'd just struck a major nerve. It was ruthless, it was brilliant, and you know what? It worked.
But behind that killer instinct was this totally different mindset. For Ogilvy, the hunt for clients wasn't some grim, desperate business. It was a sport. It was a game to be played with gusto, with a sense of fun. And that lighthearted attitude is what gave him the resilience to handle all the rejection and just keep pushing forward with that same incredible energy.
Winning clients is one thing, but keeping them? That's the real game. Ogilvy knew that long-term success didn't come from the hunt. It came from building real, lasting partnerships. And he had some incredibly strong opinions on how both sides, the agency and the client, needed to act.
For agencies, his advice was pretty simple. Be a true partner. That meant you had to be candid, you had to admit your mistakes before you got caught, but most importantly, it meant having courage. He tells a story about appeasing a client on a huge strategic decision he knew was wrong. He later called that moment his Munich, a complete and utter disaster of a compromise. That lesson was burned into his memory. Never, ever surrender your professional judgment just to make a client happy. And then look at this, he completely flips the script and gives just as many rules to the clients themselves. This is what made his thinking so powerful. He was demanding a true partnership. His best advice? First, set your agency free from fear.
because scared people just can't do brilliant work. And my absolute favorite? Don't compete with your agency on creativity. As he famously put it, why keep a dog and bark yourself?
So why are we still talking about a guy from the Mad Men era in our world of AI, data, and algorithms? Because his core ideas about people, about leadership, and about creativity, they're absolutely timeless. And maybe they're more important now than ever before.
This right here is the heart of his entire philosophy. In a world that's all about committees and consensus and collaboration, Ogilvy was a fierce, unapologetic believer in the power of the individual. He argued that great work doesn't come from a group vote. It comes from a formidable leader with a clear vision, passion, and what he always called fire in their belly.
At the end of the day, this is the big takeaway. It doesn't matter if you're in advertising or tech or art or anything else. Ogilvy's message is that creating something truly great isn't about following some formula. It's about courage, it's about having impossibly high standards, and it's about having a deep, profound respect for your craft and for the people you're serving.
So I want to leave you with this question. In our modern world, a world that is obsessed with data and collaborative teams, is Ogilvy's maverick spirit, this absolute belief in the lone, formidable leader, is that just a relic of the past? Or is it the very thing we've been missing all along?